everyone, and welcome to the Training Ground Podcast with your host, Kevin Barry.
In this episode, Kevin is speaking with Maddie Petry. Maddie is a mental conditioning coach and works at the world-renowned IMG Academy. Today they will be diving into one of the most commonly overlooked aspects of athlete development. Maddie will be talking about why athletes should develop a second or extended identity outside of sport, how to deal with motivation, stress, anxiety, and arousal related to game days, how to develop a long-term positive mindset as an athlete, and her career in sports psychology and her new position at IMG Academy.
Maddie, I appreciate you coming on Training Ground Podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm super excited to get to chat.
I know you're the first person that has a background that's not directly in strength and conditioning, but I think you bring a lot of value to the field on the performance aspect. Can you tell me about your academic background and your job title at the moment and kind of how you got into sports psychology as such from there?
Yeah, well, first, thank you. I always love being able to provide a different perspective than what would maybe be the traditional viewpoint in terms of performance. But my own background, it started with having a pretty poor mental performance track record as a high school athlete and then cycling in college. I was my own worst enemy. And it wasn't until I took sports psychology in my undergrad where I realized, oh, this is a thing. So really becoming fascinated with the idea that I could work on my confidence. I could look within to find the answers I was looking for, to be able to provide that sense of control that I so desperately wanted. I would, before a race, I used to rely on a very strict regimen to get me prepared. And that was what I thought brought me the luck or the good vibes to perform well. So I was really relying on hope as a strategy. But then, sports psychology taught me, okay, no, there are tools that you can utilize just as, you do a warm up to get your muscles warm. You can do the same thing for your mind. So graduated, and then with my undergrad undergrad kinesiology. And I knew that I wanted to get into more the behavior change aspect, but I didn't necessarily consider sports psychology right off the bat. I did health coaching, but that still really wasn't what I wanted. And I realized it was working with an athletic population that really brought, the fire, the passion. So sure enough, I found sport and exercise psychology as a master's program at Cal State Long Beach when I lived in Los Angeles. And over those 2 years, learned a lot and definitely found my niche. And with my capstone project that I did, it looked at athletic identity in high school athletes and, the consequences that arise from someone identifying really strongly as an athlete versus being able to say, I am a teenager who plays volleyball rather than I am a volleyball player, just the differences between that. And that's how I got into the idea of student athlete development and working with younger athletes, just being able to help them, traverse. I mean, being a young adult is already challenging enough.
Of course, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But being able to provide that support and safe space to really just examine who they are and what they want to accomplish. And that's how I've kind of molded my own way, essentially, because I didn't want to go through and get my PhD after I graduated. I wanted to hop right into the applied side. And so that's what ended me at Wake Forest in their student athlete development department, and really getting to have those conversations of, hey, how can we be better than we were yesterday? And just really affect change that way. And unfortunately, an unpaid internship can only last so long, which is what I had at Wake. So jump back into more of the personal training side of things just for, a year and a half or so. But then kept going with my mental performance training, coaching on the side, accrued my hours for my CMPC, got that. And now I'm starting at IMG as a mental conditioning coach, which has been the goal for a few years.
Absolutely.
Now.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yes. So
Fantastic.
Very excited to not necessarily have mental performance be my side hustle, but be what I'm able to focus on full time. So very, very much looking forward to that change of pace.
That's excellent. No, it's great to see you've been able to go all in and it's paid off. Obviously a pure passion of yours. So that's fantastic.
It's been a path.
Well, What were the initial thoughts for friends and family when you were thinking about sports psychology? Were they receptive to that, or was that something that only a very few amount of people do? Were there any hesitation or
Yeah,
anxiety on your end?
that's a great question. Well, first and foremost, I grew up with very supportive parents, but I had to explain to them what the field was, and
Hmm.
my husband too. He played football in college for a couple of years, so he was familiar with the trials and tribulations that being, especially a D1 athlete, provides. And so, just being able to say, "Hey, this is a legitimate field," similarly to strength and conditioning. You call on those coaches to make you stronger physically.
Hmm.
Sports psychology in that field is the same for your brain. And these skills that we want to harness and get better, we have to repeatedly challenge ourselves and practice them, and that's what this field provides. So it only required a short description,
Hmm.
and they saw how excited I was about it, and it
Yeah.
only reinforced my desire to join the field, because I could feel how passionate and excited I was about it. I never really had to force it, be like, oh, I have to wake up and do this. It's
Hmm.
always felt pretty natural for me, and I think, again, that just ties back into my own experience with being a competitor,
Hmm.
and figuring out there's only so much I can do on the physical side, and if you really want to be your best, then you have to examine what's going on in between your ears. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with, when you're talking with someone who's super passionate about, what they do or what their interests are. It's easy to be, jump on board and be like, "Yep, that's
Of
legit. Let's
course.
go."
Yeah, and it's an easy sell too. I think we can get into that for programs starting up a little bit later. Um, can you talk a little bit about your time at Wake Forest then? Obviously, you said that was the internship role. Was that your first practical experience or kind of outside of the classroom? And what was the general day to day there for you, that environment?
Yeah, so I was about halfway done with my CMPC hours. So I had about 200 hours working with young athletes at that point when I was still in Los Angeles. And then I came to find this internship position because I love tying back into my capstone project, athletic identity. That's a huge piece that student athlete development departments work on. Being able to develop the athlete outside of their physical performance. They're looking at personal well-being, professional. Do you have a resume? Can you list off 3 things that you're really good at or that you like about yourself? And those are the kind of conversations we were really getting into on a daily basis. And it's shocking, saddening, but also inspiring, because it's a whole whirlwind of emotions. Because a lot of these athletes, when you ask them what's your favorite thing about yourself, they wouldn't be able to talk about anything outside of their sport. So
Hmm.
again, providing that space to say, "Hey, let's consider who you are outside of your statistics, or what you've accomplished so far in the field or court."
Hmm.
And that's what was really inspiring about the work, because these are young athletes that maybe for the first time are thinking about who they are outside of their sport. So a lot of resume chats and career building workshops, coupled with, again, the personal development of just asking, like, who am I? What do I
Hmm.
like? Because I think a lot of our young athletes, they just get pigeonholed into being, that's a basketball player, that's a volleyball player, whatever sport it is. And being able to self-reflect and have it be normalized
Hmm.
is huge. And so that's what I spent the most of my time doing at Wake. And it was really great because Ashley Wechter, the director of that department, she's amazing. She had such a genuine passion and just desire to help these student athletes be the best that they could be. And so working for someone with that passion, it just, carried over and overflowed to
Yeah.
anyone she came in contact with. And so I learned a lot from her. And like I said, the bummer was it was just unpaid, so I couldn't
Hmm.
stay there.
Yeah. How do you approach that conversation initially with an athlete? I was injured my sophomore year myself, first game of the season playing soccer. And like you said, you do have an identity crisis almost. And we see it a lot with athletes, especially at our level, work at Division 2, that they don't have the support or structure they might need. But how do you approach that conversation of them that they're more than an athlete without saying, Maddie is a dream killer and she doesn't see me as, this star athlete that I am,
Yeah.
given a plan B as such?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, anytime you're having that kind of conversation with someone, what I've found is you have to be able to build rapport and have them trust you to engage in that conversation, because it's not easy to let your guard down, especially with a lot of our athletes. They're taught to be tough, put a band-aid on it. Don't talk about anything too personal. We don't want that. That doesn't
Mhm.
belong in the weight room or whatever it might be. And so being able to relate and say, hey, I know this injury, it seems like your life is over, but I promise you it isn't. Let's focus on what we can do or strengthen right now and engage in to, potentially get you back to playing or because I mean, injury, whether it's season ending or, totally ends your career, it's a little bit different of conversation. But saying, acknowledging that hurt and that pain and saying, let's redirect our attention and focus, even just temporarily, to saying, okay, what else do you like to do? And really being able to emphasize that even just because we're talking about something other than your sport doesn't mean that it's any less important. We can, parallel process and talk about, multiple different things, because that's our identity. We're not just one category. As humans, we're so much more diverse than that.
Mhm.
So again, just providing that alternative perspective to say, hey, let's just think outside of the box a little bit. But again, showing them that it's okay to do that, because it's heartbreaking to see how many athletes don't engage in that kind of conversation until they have no other choice, like with an injury or something, or like, for instance, when COVID hit last year with, the tournaments being canceled and seasons just ending, that's a terrifying reality for these athletes to deal
Mhm.
with. And so providing, an outlet to say, hey, you're not alone. Let's talk about what makes you you. And people love talking about themselves when they get the
Mhm.
chance to. So it's really just being a good listener.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One of the things I've saw, just anecdotal on my end, I haven't really spoken to any other people about it so far, is when COVID did happen, there was a lot of athletes I work with that kind of, they leveled up their fitness and strength and conditioning, and it was kind of something where that's the only sense of control they have,
Mm,
whereas the world's spinning out of control as such, and that they really dial in. Um, I feel like sometimes that can be positive as well as a negative trait as well, because I did some grad research on eating disorders and things like that, and
mm,
I know that can be an issue as well. So I think one of the important things that just to point out, when you were at Wake Forest, was it's a proactive conversation that you're having with athletes, right? It's not just a case of, oh, torn ACL, let's address it now. It's
mhm.
when they first come in or before their season starts and things like that.
Absolutely. It's, rather than it just being that reactive conversation, it makes such a difference, because then also again, it's just normalized. It's like everyday conversation. And just being able to see the relief that comes from that realization that our athletes had in terms of, oh, I can talk about
Mhm.
that's okay. It's awesome to provide that. And that's, one of the reasons why I wanted to stay with youth athletes, because the earlier you can have those conversations, the more impactful it can be. And, to your earlier point about the control, it's a spectrum, right? I mean, too much, and it turns into, almost like an obsessive
Mhm.
compulsive disorder. But then not enough of it, we feel just completely lost. And so really being able to work and find, the skills that put us right in that sweet spot. I also personally like the control. I really like to use more synonyms for it. Like, what can I influence instead of like having complete control over,
Mhm.
because it gets really dicey, because that's, where rituals start, and, trying to get everything perfect. And if that's what someone relies on, oh, you're missing the boat.
That's huge.
um,
Yeah, that's a great thought. That's excellent. When you're sitting down with an athlete, maybe for the first time, How are you able to develop some goals or processes that, you don't want to rid yourself of a job on your end too, but how can you teach that athlete independence of that they don't need you every minute of the day, that long term they can build sustainable habits for themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, the goal is that they wouldn't need me. They just come to see me because they like me. They like
Hmm.
the conversations we have, and they know that I can provide, new skills for them. So that is the ultimate goal. But like you said, I need a job. But, to make, goals and just, I guess we'll start there. Goals, the most effective, what I found is really starting with the values and what makes that person tick, finding out what motivates them and being able to formulate a plan from there. There has to be ownership from the athlete to say, okay, this is the meaningful direction I want my life to take. And I can't decide that for them. And that's something that I always emphasize is, the person that I'm speaking to, they know their life the best. I'm
Hmm.
just here to facilitate a conversation, exploration. I don't know anything, especially from the start, about that person.
Hmm.
And so while I might be the expert, or the coach, they have a lot to teach me about themselves. That's how I'm going to learn about them. And so giving that back and forth, we build that trusting relationship. And so then maybe I'm able to suggest something down the line because I know them, I know them. And it's not, giving it unsolicited advice, which we all always roll our eyes at because
Hmm.
that's not great. It's more annoying than anything else. But being able to help them, figure out what makes them tick. And Angela Duckworth, she's one of my favorites. She does a ton of research on grit,
Hmm.
and to become gritty, she talks about finding goals that not only are meaningful to you but are meaningful to others. So if you look at, kind of your life purpose as, being able to affect change positively for other people, that's what's really going to make you be able to wake up every day and say, okay, how can I be 1% better? And having those kind of conversations, that's what I found learn or leads to more long-term adherence rather than it just being, a phase that they're going through or just for one season. Because ultimately, everyone's athletic career ends. It just looks different depending on who you are and what sport you play and all those other factors. But again, it's just a lot of self-reflection I've
Yeah.
found that makes it personal.
No, that's great. It's not a case. It's a lot of open-ended conversation, not just checking boxes at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Being able to ask open-ended questions was definitely part of my curriculum
Hmm.
in my master's program.
That's fantastic. Can we get into that a little bit, and then let's talk about your certification that or
Yeah.
certificate that you do have, CMPC.
Mhm.
It's a gold standard. I know I get one of my professors I used to work with said you need to talk about yourself more, but you kind of count down your qualifications, but you really do have the gold standard in the field. Can you talk about that and how that process was for you?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to go into the PhD route. The statistics class I took was already difficult enough. I was like, nope, applied. So CMPC, they talk about it and during our courses. And so they set us up to be able to start accruing our hours while we were there on campus. And so I worked with a handful of volleyball teams across LA County. And by the time I graduated, I think I said earlier, I had about 200 hours. It's a 400-hour certification. So the requirements, you have to have a master's or a doctorate. You have to accrue, your 400 hours of shadowed work. So saying that, you worked with specific athletic populations, you worked on, certain skills. It's a little bit broad in terms of, what you can specifically teach. But the idea is that you have a mentor, they're checking off your hours, you're engaging with them. They see how you're consulting, what you can improve on. So it's very back and forth, which is great. But
Mhm.
400 hours takes a little bit. But along with that, when you go to, before you can sit for the exam, you have to also show that the coursework that you took during your master's or doctorate program. So specific courses outside of sports psychology, like I think it's helping behaviors, or which, for instance, I took a couple classes in the psychology department on campus, which is really neat. It wasn't just in the kinesiology department. So being able to get some more clinical, I guess, experience and conversations in that area, which definitely provided a ton of skill sets for me to be able to really improve and think about outside of the realm of sport, but then also apply it in my own unique way, because in the psychology department, they're not thinking about athletics during their coursework. But yeah, then after you send all of that in to AASP, the Association of Applied Sports Psychology, you get to sit for the exam, and then you take it, and if you pass it, you get a certificate. But definitely, I mean, I'm not sure if my parents would like me saying this, but I think it's the proudest piece of paper I've gotten thus far, on top of my degrees, just because I know all the work I put into it, and the confidence that it provides you as a practitioner, because, everyone suffers from imposter syndrome from time to time, say, in terms of, do I belong here? Did I earn this? And this, certification really provides that oomph when I need it, and saying, yes, Maddie, you belong here, do your thing. So that's the process of it. So it took I'd say like 2.5 years, but very much well worth it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had no idea about that kind of background, coming from strength and conditioning myself. I remember I might have been 15 or 16 growing up, and I read, not sure if you're familiar with Mind Gym, the name of the book, Jerry
I've
Mack.
heard about it.
And that was kind of my first thought that, maybe youth athletes not that you don't need strength and conditioning, but you always push towards hard work. And a lot of people think like flexibility, mobility stuff, or even mental imagery, it doesn't feel hard, so it's not worth the effort, but there can be a lot of small wins there.
Absolutely. And I think you touch on a really interesting point too, because, I think a lot of my approach deals with mindfulness and acceptance. I encourage you to look up the MAC approach. It's called Mindfulness, Acceptance, Commitment. But that framework, it's not necessarily meditation based, but it's asking yourself to kind of go within. And a lot of mindfulness work gets kind of trashed on a little bit, because it's like, oh, well, I tried deep breathing once and I didn't really feel a difference. It's like, okay, well, if you only went to the gym one time, would you notice an improvement in your strength? No. So a lot of it has to do, or a lot of, just providing that perspective for people, saying, yeah, of course, if you only stuck with it for a couple weeks, it's not going to lead to any like groundbreaking changes. This is stuff you have to carry throughout your life. So again, starting with youth athletes, if it becomes the norm to work on their mental performance, just like they do with their physical training, 5-6 days a week, man, they are going to be eons ahead of their peers who just start, potentially in college, or if they reach the professional level at that level too.
How can you define success in that? It must be difficult to try and sell to somebody that's never done it before, or their parents never were elite athletes. But how can we kind of inspire the next generation or the youth athlete to say, I'll try it out today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, the research part of me, you say you can do a survey, when you first start, how are your skills, A, B, C, D, and then, test afterwards. But the best way that I like to describe it, mental performance as a whole and what it teaches you, it's looking at reframing competition, because competition is often, framed as you versus someone else. But I like to flip it around a little bit and say, and I can't remember which book I read this in, so I definitely didn't come up with it.
I do need your book list. You've got a lot of good resources, I think.
Yes, I will definitely need to send you that after this. But it says competition is me versus myself yesterday with you versus yourself yesterday. So instead of framing, the person I'm trying to beat is, the opposing team, it's asking myself, what am I doing better than I did yesterday? So being able to identify an action that you want to improve on. So whether it's, a certain physical skill, so you're trying to kick the ball farther, or you want to feel more confident. And again, that's pretty, open-ended, but everyone knows what it's like to, feel their chest is puffed out. They feel great. What do you need to do to accomplish that? And, whether it's writing it down, which I always recommend like my athletes do, or just keeping it in their head, you can identify, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's my effort in terms of being better or more confident than I was yesterday, and getting that self check-in, because again, that puts the power back on the person themselves, and they don't have to rely on anyone else to say, oh, well, you're actually lacking in that skill set, or you're not improving. They have the power, and then they show up to competition saying, all right, I know because of the last, week and a half, I've improved on these certain skills. I'm ready to go. So that's how I like to really frame it for people, because it is so, you can't, write down the weights that your brain is, pushing out, but getting people to really examine, where they were yesterday, where they are today, and that's where we go. And that's how you can determine the direction that you need to continue in to get better.
No, that's great. The first thing that came to mind as you were talking about that was an athlete maybe that is not playing as much as they used to, and they say it's the coach's fault. But you can really break it down and see what you can influence, like you were talking about. That's
absolutely great. Yeah, I love that your word choice of influence.
Yeah, I took a note of it. I said gotta get it in here somewhere today.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's that's the blaming is a really good example of a common thinking trap that we can fall into, because it's easier to put the the responsibility on someone else. But a true athlete or competitive performer is going to say, okay, that's my bad, what can I do to change that outcome? And then boom, you have your action plan. And so again, it gives you all the power, which is what so much of our anxiety and that anxious feeling arises from, feeling like we can't, get a good grasp on things. So I love that example.
If we're looking at, say, an example with somebody that has a game or an important meet coming up, depending on their event, can you talk a little bit about stress, anxiety, and just arousal in general? Because what I have noticed in large group settings is like you always have to be hype, or but that doesn't work for everybody. I've read some baseball players like listen to classical music before games, stuff like that. But is it an individual approach, have you found? And what can individual athletes do to kind of zone in for game day itself?
Yeah, again, the self-awareness piece is key. So realizing, if you need a hype playlist to get you going, and whether that's, Mozart or, Jay-Z, you have to find where you are on that spectrum. Some people love being around others. Some prefer to be off on their own. So first and foremost, being able to identify yourself where you are. But I think what leads to a lot of pre-competition jitters and anxiety is this idea that I haven't done enough, or, wanting to make sure that you're going to compete at the highest level. And a really great light bulb moment is to realize that there's nothing you can do to change your readiness for on that day of competition. Everything leading up to that point, that's where the work comes in. But that game or event, that's when you get to let go and have fun, because ideally, you enjoy your sport. That's why you put in all the work. You want to have fun, and competition is when you're able to do that, because you're not, busting your butt in the weight room. You're getting to run free and, play out the plays that you've practiced. So no amount of worry can influence, the outcome of your ability at that moment. So being able to call on your confidence and say, all right, what did I do this week that's going to guarantee me to perform at a better level than I was previously? And again, that focus is within. You're not focused on external control. So even, if your AirPods weren't charged and you wanted to listen to playlists, you can still get plenty hyped by thinking about how much, work you've put in that previous week to get you ready for that at that moment. And that for me as a competitor was a huge learning moment, because I always freaked out the day of. I had a teammate that used to throw up before every race.
Yeah, I think everybody has one. I had one too in college.
It's awful.
Yeah.
And just that's not what we want to experience, because you can't perform optimally like that.
Of course, yeah.
It's crazy what nerves and anxiety can do for you, literally making you throw up everything that you have.
Yeah, that's, at the same time, though, a certain level of stress is good, you would argue, right? That
Absolutely.
It shows that, you care of the environment you are in as such.
For sure.
I found an article just yesterday I will send to you, but it was an interview with Grant Holloway about what he's doing to prepare for the Olympics. And that's exactly what he talked about, like you said, is that he can't control it. Once he goes out on the track, that he's the best in the world for a reason, and really trust in his training and his approach.
Yeah, there's definitely an optimal arousal point, and it differs for everyone. I'm trying to remember what that graph is called, but it's essentially an inverse bell graph. And it talks about, how depending on the sport or environment you're in, what you need to feel great. And up to a certain point, anxiety, it gets you prepared, because we see all the time in sports. Like if you just watched the Gonzaga and Baylor game, Gonzaga came out super slow, and they clearly, to me, it seemed like they weren't firing on all cylinders from the get-go. So that's obviously being under aroused. But when you have too much anxiety, then you obviously can plummet too. So finding that zone is super important, because if we don't take something as a potential threat, then we often just we're not on our best foot forward. So totally agree with you there.
Oh, that's great. Can you talk a bit about your new role? I see you're working at IMG now, or very soon. What's that transition going to be like for you, for your day-to-day activities, and then kind of what role will you play at the department and that high-performance model as such?
Yeah, so I'm joining IMG as a mental conditioning coach. It's a job I've sought out for quite a while. So persistence there, but I am absolutely ready and confident for the role, where now looking back, a couple years ago when I applied for the position originally, I think I would have done okay, but definitely not where I am now. So, everything happens for a reason. But I'll be joining a team of 11 other mental conditioning coaches. So there's a whole mental conditioning program there. It's part of their athletic and personal development department. There's about 1,200 student athletes on campus, and we each, from my understanding, get a team to work with. So I've been told that I'll be working primarily with track and field, which is great because that's where I have the most experience as a coach as well as competitor. So doing a lot of just mixed kind of coaching in terms of more small group team training, but I'm sure one-on-ones will happen. But I'm so excited to get back into one, youth athletics, but then two, being in person again. I don't do well with the remote life.
Yeah.
I mean, setting my own schedule has been cool, but I'm ready to get back in person and just really start to or not start, but help continue the development of the holistic development of these student athletes. So it's going to be a learning experience for me as well, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations again. That's huge. Last question, Maddie. Where do you see the future of the field going in sports psychology? Are we making as much progress as we should? And kind of what will the next 5 years look like, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be in this field, because even when I started my degree back in 2016, there's been so much more, presence or just what's the word, exposure across, athletics in general with mental performance. You look at all of these professional athletes coming out and talking about, how like Calm. I think LeBron is the sponsor for that Calm app, which is all about, mindfulness and meditation. Kevin Love talking about, his struggles with mental performance. So the more we can normalize just talking about like the demons that we are dealing with on a regular basis, the more it's going to, I just think, propel this field forward. And just because you engage in mental performance work doesn't mean that you're weak or that, you do have demons that you need to fight. It's just saying, hey, I've identified this area of improvement. Let's get better. So I think there is a lot of stigma that still needs to be dealt with in terms of what mental performance actually is, because I think a lot of people still look at it as therapy, which is not the case. I mean, feelings do come out just naturally, but it's not anything like a therapy session. There's so much more to it. So I think it's a very exciting time for a field as it continues to get more exposure. People become more open-minded to what it can actually lead to. And, there's so many great examples of professional athletes saying, it was my mental performance that made a difference, because everyone can, improve their physical performance to a similar level.
Absolutely.
You see like the optimal height, weight, strength ratio and all of that. But that leads to me to believe that the biggest difference then can be made by what's going on in between your ears. So that should excite any competitor saying, oh, wow, I can do that. I can get better by just thinking about my thoughts. Okay, let's do it. Because it's really not that hard. I think there's also a barrier, which understandably so, in something new or unknown. It's like, oh, that seems a little scary, or I'm not sure what to do with it. But you don't need any fancy skill or outside tool. Like even when you go in the weight room, you need a barbell, you need bands. Body weight training only goes so far.
Of course, yeah.
So it's a really, doesn't have to be an extravagant overhaul to your current training to implement it in. So a long-winded answer to your question, it's a very exciting time.
No, that's a great insight. There's a lot of takeaways from here. Even I've taken a lot of notes myself, and do want to follow up with some things off mic, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Maddie. Maddie, I appreciate you coming on, and want to wish you all the best as you start in your new role at IMG Academy. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I've loved the conversation.